No, I guess we can get started. Darren, is it okay for me to get started? It's 2:30 my time.
Yeah, so I'd go. It's being recorded anyway, so yeah, I'd commence. I'll let everybody in who turns up late.
Got it. Thank you so much, Darren. Thanks for your support.
No worries.
So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are listening from or looking at this from. Welcome to this round of expert roundtables, essentially architecting business critical Oracle workloads on VMware hybrid cloud platform. I do have a couple of slides, but they're basically just for talking points. So, and this time is your time. So I could either go through these slides, right? You guys can please feel free at any point of time to interrupt me, to stop me and ask me questions. Or if you guys have any questions in mind, we could take those questions. So, I could make it, either way, make it interactive either way. I guess silence is an answer. I probably could move on then.
Yep.
All right, no worries. And then if you guys have any questions, please feel free. Just interrupt me. All right, let's see. Essentially, right? See, what happens is, at some point of time, when one considers, right, when one considers the whole prospect of virtualizing the Oracle workloads, right? The most important thing, or one of the most important things one has to keep in mind is essentially identify the source platform, right? Where are they coming from? One of the source platform could be, right, physical, which essentially is the Oracle Solaris platform, right? It's the Sun Solaris, or the IBM AIX, or the HP UX, right? So essentially, you're looking at the big endian systems, right? And when I say the big endian systems, this is essentially the block format, right? And for these systems, right, when you look at any block on these systems, right, the actual physical blocks, it's always the MSB, or the most significant byte, and the least significant byte, right? Now, the difference why I had to bring up the topic about the most significant byte and least significant byte is when you virtualize or when you do a re-platform from any of these big endian systems to a little endian system. Little endian system may be your x86, right, your Linux or the Windows. This is not a straightforward process wherein you just pick up the data or you suck the data and you dump the data on the other side. So there would have to be a block format change, right? So that's one of the sources to be considered, right? The second sources that you might be coming off could be your engineered system, right? For example, the Oracle Exadata, the Oracle ODA, the Oracle Database Appliance, right? And both of them, they run Oracle Enterprise Linux, right? And the third source that you guys may be coming from could be virtualized platform, essentially a non-VMware platform. Could be the KVM, could be the Zen, or could even be the Oracle OVM, right? But irregardless of where you come from, whether it's the Solaris, the AIX, HP UX, or the engineered systems, the Exadata or the ODA, or even the virtual non-VMware platform, right? One has to keep in mind that you would have to inculcate best practices, right? Best practices in every layer of the stack. So in my role as the Oracle practice lead for VMware, when I speak to customers across all 4 geos, right? And if somebody would ask me a question, right, well, what are the different things that I have to go through? What are the different guides that I would have to read in order for me to set up a optimal platform, right, for running Oracle workloads? And the Oracle workload could be anything. Could be an Oracle rack, could be a single instance, could be a data guard, could be your ADG, so on and so forth, or even Fusion middleware, could be an e-business suite, right? The short and sweet answer is, right, based on your platform, and let's say, just for the sake of discussion, your platform is 6.7. What I would do is read the performance best practices guide for 6.7. Why? Because that guide basically tells me the nuances. It tells me what to look out for, right? It tells me what to do and it tells me what not to do. For example, NUMA, it talks about memory reservation, right? It talks about hyperthreading. It talks about the advantages of staying within a NUMA node versus going across a NUMA node, right? So it goes into the nuances of such artifacts, right? The second guide that I would read is the Oracle Databases and VMware Best Practices Guide. Essentially, the link is there in the bottom of the slide here. And why is that guide so essential? Why is it so important? Because that guide essentially goes into every nuances that one should be cognizant of, especially on the operating system side, right? On the virtual machine side, on the database side, right? So when you're talking about Oracle database, things like huge pages, right? Things like traditional huge pages, things like transparent huge pages, things like I/O scheduling, things like queue depth, right? The PV-SCSI queue depth and the VMDK queue depth. And why is that so important, right? I mean, right out of the gate, when you virtualize an Oracle workload, it just works, right? It works like a charm. It's very transparent. It's very seamless. There is no line in the Oracle alert log file that essentially says, hey, look at me. I'm sitting on a VMware platform. But then if one wishes to accelerate, if you wish to accelerate your Oracle workloads, then yes, these recommendations or these best practices then comes into being. So one definitely have to be cognizant about these best practices, right? And last but not the least, if let's say you guys were running Oracle RAC, there is an Oracle RAC best practices guide, right, that we wrote 2.5 months ago, that goes into every incarnation of running Oracle RAC with every permutation combination on a VMware vSphere platform, right? So these links, these slides will be provided at the end of the session, and there are links in this slide essentially that will show you where these guides are. But moving on, right. So what happens is, all along we've been talking about for the last couple of seconds about, platforming or re-platforming, right? Customers workload from, let's say, any other big Indian systems, right? Or the engineered systems, or even the non-VMware platform, virtualized, right? Over to a virtualized platform. See, at some point of time, once you land on the vSphere platform, right? Now customers, right, they look to move to the cloud, right? So all the customers, any of the customers, they're essentially looking to get the best of both worlds, right? And they don't want to buy any new hardware. You guys don't want to refactor. Nobody wants to re-platform. The reason why? Because any application or infrastructure rework, right, it's 60% of the cost, and it's basically 90% of the time, right? So essentially you want to leverage your existing investment, right? And then essentially make sure that you use the same skill set and same tools, right? So I mean, these are some of the things that customers are looking for a hybrid cloud model, right? And moving on to the next one, and these are some of the VMware hybrid cloud offerings that we currently have in the market today. I mean, we unveiled VMC or VMware Cloud on AWS in 2017, right? OCVS or Oracle Cloud VMware Solution, that was announced September 16th, 2019. And the forthcoming slide, I'll basically talk about another point as to why this partnership was so critical and so important for both VMware and for Oracle, right? The Google Cloud VMware Engine, that got GA'd June 20th, 2020, and the Azure VMware Solution, or AVS, that was unveiled as well, right? The link at the bottom talks about all 4 public cloud offerings, the hybrid cloud offering from VMware, right, and our different partners. But then, I mean, this slide basically talks just about, once at some point of time you're on premises, right, you have a fork in the road, right? All customers have a choice, right, of either going to AWS, either going to VMware Cloud on AWS, VMC, right, or OCVS, or GCVE, or AVS, based on, right, their need, based on the demand, based on the fact that, this particular platform offers me native services that are required for my workloads, and it makes sense for me to go this route, right? So you truly have a choice to go or pick the route that you want to go based on your workload demands and based on the kind of services that one requires, one needs. The reason why I did talk about as to why the strategic partnership was so important was September 16, 2019, right? A new partnership was announced between VMware and Oracle, right? And essentially there was 2 offshoots or 2 important offshoots from this particular partnership. The first thing was we unveiled a product called the Oracle Cloud VMware Solution, right? Essentially that enables the customer to run the VCF or the VMware Cloud Foundation on an Oracle Gen 2 cloud infrastructure, right? The most important thing here is Oracle then became a partner in the VCPP, the VMware Cloud Partner Program, right? And that OCVS will be sold by Oracle and the partners, right? So that's the first offshoot of this particular partnership, right? The second offshoot, right, which is equally important, is, let me move on to the next slide, right, is the change to the metaling note 249212.1, right? This is of utmost critical. It's of utmost importance. It's very critical. See, the reason being, and for people who are very familiar with the note, right? And if you look at the note here, there used to be a paragraph, right? There used to be a paragraph that essentially said, if customers have an issue on a physical platform, Oracle reserves the right to have the customer replicated on another physical architecture, the same physical architecture, and if that problem persists, Oracle would then take up that case. If you happen to look at this note right here on the screen, no, that particular paragraph is gone, right? And so this particular note has been cleansed, right? It's very clean, it's very neat. It says very unambiguously that Oracle customers with an active support contract and running supported versions of Oracle product will receive assistance from Oracle when running those products on a VMware virtualized environment, right? So this is great for both Oracle and for VMware, right? Now, building on to this, I mean, this is the first leg of the partnership, right? There are two more legs of this particular partnership between Oracle and VMware. The second leg happens to be, right, the VMware GSS, right? So if you happen to go to VMware.com, business critical application, there is a total ownership policy by VMware, right? So there is a total ownership policy by VMware that essentially states VMware will take all Oracle cases. VMware will take all Oracle cases and drive it to resolution from beginning to end. So what does that mean? If you guys are running an Oracle database in your shop today, right, and for some reason, let's say you get an Aura 600 or Aura 4031, you have a control for corruption, or let's say you have a database corruption, right? Typically, what do we recommend, right? Because since you guys have paid 20 to 24% towards Oracle support, please go the normal route, open up a TAR, excuse me, or open up an SR with Oracle, right? And 99% of the time, Oracle will take up the SR and make sure that they give you a bug or they give you a patch fix for that, right? But for any point in time, if you were to get any kind of runaround or any kind of pushback, and essentially, and that will be very rare. It's very rare. I mean, it's only happened once since I joined VMware in 2012, and that was because of a slight miscommunication, right? There's a great synergy between the Oracle TSCs and the VMware GSS, right? If you ever were to get any kind of pushback, right, all we recommend you guys is open up a ticket with VMware GSS, right? And in the first line, bold red if you can, please, put in this sentence, please route this ticket to the Oracle DBA team within VMware GSS. And the second line, please put in, my Oracle SR number is 12345.678, for example. I'm just making this up, right? What then happens is this particular ticket gets routed immediately to the Oracle DBA teams sitting within VMware GSS, striped and spread across all three locations, right? Cork, Ireland, Broomfield, Colorado, and also in Bangalore, India. So that way your ticket gets a faster resolution. And then once VMware GSS, the Oracle team gets your ticket, right, we'll make sure that we reach out to Oracle and we'll drive this ticket to resolution, right? So that's the second pillar of this whole partnership. And it's been there since November 10th, right, 2010. Now, the third pillar is the TSAnet.org. The TSAnet.org. Essentially, it's like think of it like a Geneva Convention. Think of it like a consortium, right? Where all companies, including Cisco, including Dell EMC, VMware, right, Oracle, they're all part of that. I mean, the reason why the consortium was created was to make sure none of the mutual customers are put in any kind of issues, right? So it was put in place to make sure that companies work together effectively to help their mutual customers, right? So essentially using the TSAnet.org, using the fact that we have the total ownership policy, and the fact, right, that we have a partnership with Oracle, and Oracle is a VCPP partner. It's part of the VCPP program, and that this particular landmark node 249.212.1 has been changed emphatically and drastically, right? So this heralds a brand new partnership, right, between Oracle and VMware. The thing is, you know, when depending on who you talk to, depending on who you listen to, right, where you read, you know, what source you read from, right, there's a lot of misconception about Oracle licensing, right? Essentially, you must have heard stories about how one would have to license, right, every socket, every core, every hub, every router, every switch, right, every data center, every galaxy, pretty much the entire Milky Way, when one have to run an Oracle product on a vSphere environment. And that's not true. That's not true, right? Thing is, any Oracle licensing discussion, right, right, on a VMware platform, right, stems from three documents and three documents alone. In fact, any Oracle licensing discussion on any physical architecture, be that Solaris, AIX, HPUX, be that physical x86 or even virtual x86, stems from three documents and three documents alone. The first is what's called a technical support statement that essentially states any customer on the face of Earth will pay 20 to 24% towards Oracle support, right? The second is what's called the processor core factor table that assigns a weight to every processor family. And last but not the least, right, it's the OLSA, the Oracle Licensing and Service Agreement, aka Oracle Master Agreement. Now, there are a lot of sessions here in VMworld which basically goes very deep dive into these documents and talks about, you know, what's binding and what's not binding, you know, what's legally, binding on you guys and what's not, right? So we won't go very deep into that. But in a very high level, right? None of these documents talks about the fact that one would have to license every socket, every core where Oracle is not running. No. It only talks about the definition of a processor, and that processor could be a socket on the core in the current sense, right? It talks about it in the current tense, not in the futuristic tense, not in the past tense. There are no words called should, could, would, might, and may. There are words only like is and are, right? The actual definition of a processor is those processes where the Oracle binaries are installed, / and are running. And so one would ask this question, why is this so important for me? Because that essentially lays on the fact that you only have to license those cores or those sockets in a vSphere environment where you have the Oracle virtual machine sucking compute from. Because remember, right, Oracle licensing is only based on compute. It's not based on memory. It's not based on network. It's not based on disk. It's not based on data store or your data center or virtual center, right? So the key thing to keep in mind is show Oracle the window that you need to see. Right? Show Oracle the window that they need to see. And the window that they need to see is the operating system and the Oracle database. That's it. When you talk to VMware, if you have to open up a case, that's where we get involved. And we ask you access, or we get access to the virtual center, right? The data center, the cluster, the server, and so on and so forth. But the Oracle realm, the Oracle kingdom only exists, or is only there till the Oracle binaries and the Oracle database, right? So all I'm trying to say is, right, you don't have to license socket and cores, right, for servers where Oracle databases or even Java is not running. So please do have a look at the links in the bottom of the slide here, right? Essentially, the second link is of utmost importance because that tells you how one can effectively prepare himself or herself for an Oracle audit, right? These are some of the collaterals I spoke about in the start of the session, right? And essentially, you guys can take a picture of that, or I think these slides will be available to you guys, so you guys can download that. And if there's something that I would like you guys to take away from today's roundtable session, that would be this one slide, right? So that would be this one slide. Please, just bookmark the slide because any collateral, any Oracle on VMware collateral, be that licensing, be that best practices, right? Be that rack deployment guide, be that an Oracle on vSAN, Oracle on VMworld, Oracle with persistent memory, Oracle with RDMA, Oracle with 1 gig huge pages, right? Or Oracle with VMware Cloud on AWS, or Oracle on GCDE, or even on OCVS, or even on AVS, right? Each and every part of the collateral that my predecessors have produced, or even I have produced since 2012, everything will find a home here. Please don't get put off by that date, 2017. It's a living blog. So anytime we produce any piece of collateral, it finds its home here. But I think I'm at the end of my slides. And like I said, I just use the slides just to kick this whole thing off. And that's me. But I'm going to bring this back here. And I want to open this session for questions. So please feel free, like I said before, right? There are Oracle licensing sessions here. Basically, you have the House of Bricks, or you have License Fortress, or even Viscosity that do very deep dive discussions, or even license consulting, right, from Netherlands that basically do a deep dive on any of the Oracle licensing subjects, right? So, you definitely can go to those sessions to listen on this topic, right, and ask them questions. But please feel free. If you have any questions, please go ahead. I'm sure you guys have questions. So. And it doesn't have to be restricted to licensing. If you have any performance tuning, any questions about how should I do this, or why should I not do that, right? How about Oracle with NUMA, Oracle with memory, right? Oracle with data stores. How do I lay this out? Any kind of layout questions? I mean, anything goes here.
I have one short question. We are right at the beginning with Oracle virtualization. What are your experience with live migration, so vMotion of Oracle databases? Do you see any problems?
So where are you coming off from?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So where are you coming off from? So are you coming off a physical architecture, or you've already virtualized your Oracle data?
It's a moment we are coming from physical and Linux virtualization.
Okay. So essentially, the thing is, you know what, there's a bit of a misconception when you talk about vMotion and Oracle databases, right? People typically say, oh, if it's a vMotion, right, well, will it affect Oracle database, especially if you're running Oracle RAC? Will you have cluster addiction, right? Will you have false addictions or false ejections, right? And the answer is absolutely no. As long as you follow best practices, right, you should not and you will not have any problem. In fact, what we did was, and this is a very old version of ESXi, 5.5, right? Using 5.5, what we did a Oracle rack paper. Essentially, we had a 3-node Oracle rack sitting on a 3-node ESXi cluster. We hit it very hard to swing bench. And while we did that, we did a merry-go-round, vMotion of the Oracle rack instances from one server to the other server. Guess what happened? Nothing happened, right? vMotion went fine, right? There was no cluster addiction. There was no false ejection. So all I'm trying to say here is it all depends on how you have set up the vMotion traffic, right? Definitely, if you have this vMotion traffic set up to a gigabit, right, obviously you will have a lot of issues. But if you make sure that you set up adequate bandwidth for your vMotion and that you don't mix your, let's say, your management, your public, your private, your Oracle rack interconnect on the same pipe, right? As long as you follow the best practice, no, you should not have any problem. And especially with vSphere 7.0, it's so beautiful, right? We have completely revamped vMotion. So what happens is with the previous versions of vSphere, right, we used to make sure that all the page tracing, right, all of the dirty page tracing, that page traces is to fire on every vCPU of the virtual machine. 7.0 was changed. We said, you know what, rather than doing it on every vCPU, do it on one vCPU so that the other vCPUs of the virtual machine are essentially doing what they have been born and bred to do, run the workload, right? So that way your workload doesn't get affected, right? And in the same way, on the same hand, you are able to do your vMotion very effectively, right? So definitely have a look at the 7.0 enhancements, right? It's completely revamped, right, vMotion. I mean, if you look at DRS, for example, all along with DRS was looking at the cluster imbalance, right? With 7.0, we started focusing on the most important guy in the room, the virtual machine, the workload. We said, you know what? We came up with a terminology called VM happiness. We want to make sure that the virtual machine is happy wherever it lands. I really don't care about cluster balance. I do care about it, but that's secondary. The primary is VM happiness, right? So the platform has become more and more sophisticated for business critical application, right? And then if you start looking at 6.5, even 6.5, or even 6.7, the enhancements of features like PVRDMA, right? Para-virtualized RDMA driver, use case, rack interconnect, persistent memory, use cases, business critical applications like Oracle databases, right? The fact that you have NVMe controllers, the fact that you can use NVDIMM controllers, right? And the very fact that with 6.5, 6.7, we increase the amount of VMTKs per PV-SCSI controller. So right now you have a total of 256 VMTKs per virtual machine. Every VMTK can go to a max of 60 to 62 terabytes. So do the math, right? So we are able to address so much of storage, so much of memory. In fact, the VRAM for the virtual machine for 7.0, that has increased as well. So we are improving the platform by leaps and bounds, right? And all of that is done to make sure that we are able to sustain, right, and then sustain the business critical applications.
Okay, thank you.
You guys have any other questions on the Oracle VMware partnership? I'm sure you must be having burning questions on that one, because that's typically a topic that people ask us questions, right, about the Oracle VMware partnership. So, like I said, anything goes here. In that case, let me ask you guys a question, right? So this is typically, I do that during any other roundtables that we were physically present, right, before the whole COVID madness started, right? So what challenges do you guys see when you virtualize your business critical application, right? Do you guys see any challenges? I'm sure there are a lot of challenges, right? I mean, what challenges do you see? Anybody?
No challenges.
Oh, thank you. Excellent answer. Yeah, so definitely, you know what, I mean, you know, there are, I won't say challenges, right, but there are always, this is always a learning process. It's always a learning process wherein one starts virtualizing their databases, right, then, you know, you have to go through certain learning phases. And that's why, right, I remarked at the start of the session, right, are the best practices guide, right? Because typically what happens is people ask me this question, okay, why should I read them? You don't have to. You don't have to read them. But then by not reading them, right, it doesn't mean that Oracle won't work. Oracle will absolutely work seamlessly and transparently right out of the gate. But if you want to accelerate the performance, right, if you want to get the maximum, right, performance from there, then, right, I mean, what we recommend is definitely go through those best practices, guys. I have two, excellent. I have two more questions. Any tips for persuading our internal Oracle DB teams to migrate Oracle databases from OVM or RAC to VMware? Okay. So here's the thing, right? I mean, if you were talking about migrating from OVM to VMware, I mean, there are a lot of points here that you know, that's been there on the internet. Plus, if you go to the one-stop shop, it's there, right? I mean, essentially, look at it, right? When you look at OVM, the very fact that you have DOM 0 and DOM U, right, that basically tells you that if you were to jeopardize DOM 0, the entire castle comes down, right? Plus the fact that, you know, sophisticated stuff like hot-add, CPU, hot-add memory, right? This whole vMotion, I know OVM has OMotion, right? But we have had vMotion for the last 10 years, right? This platform is so sophisticated, right, that OVM probably can catch up with VMware in, let's say, 25, 30 years from now. But it's not there, right? So that's to do with OVM, right? And the fact that OVM, right, and I don't know what was the last time OVM actually got updated, right? Because Oracle has basically moved from OVM over to the Linux virtualization manager, right? So they have their platform or their virtualization platform of choice is no longer OVM, but it's more of the Linux virtualization manager. With respect to VMware, it's always been VMware, right? And then we have been honing and we have been making sure that we have been, releasing more and more features on a VMware platform, right? Now, the second aspect of the question is, trying to move from RAC to VMware. There's a bit of a discussion there, right? See, because when you talk about Oracle RAC, the first thing that should come in your mind is, what are the business SLAs that basically prompted you or prompted your internal Oracle DB team to deploy RAC in the very first place, right? Is it because you wanted to have high availability, right? Is it because you wanted to have rolling patch upgrade? Is it because you wanted to have the ability for your Oracle sessions to tap over, right, to transparent application failover, to seamlessly move over from one instance to the other when one Oracle RAC instance goes down? If those are still your use cases, if your SLAs are, I can never go down and I have to be connected to my database every second of the day, every minute of the day, then yes, you absolutely need RAC. There are so many customers, right, who basically come back to, when I talk to them and they say, you know what, I really don't need RAC because during the weekend I take it down for maintenance. And then my first question is, then why did you ever put RAC in the first place here, right? So can the vSphere environment or can the vSphere infrastructure, right, replace Oracle RAC, right? You have to keep one thing in mind. Oracle RAC is application level HA. VMware is infrastructure level HA. So yes, if a virtual machine were to go down, or let's say if a host were to go down, VMware will bring up that virtual machine on another surviving node on the cluster, right? And the most important point is the biggest elephant in the room here is the Oracle database. So the time taken for the Oracle database to come up is directly proportional to, right, the recovery time here, right? But apart from that, can VMware HA replace Oracle RAC? No, they're two totally different concepts. But can they work together seamlessly? Yes, right? Because if one were to run Oracle RAC on a VMware HA, right, you basically get application level HA on an infrastructure level HA. And the same infrastructure, if you were to then, right, extend it, or if you then extend it among, across metro distance, right, or even on a cloud across multiple availability domains or availability zone, you get what's called a site level HA, right? So, I mean, that's basically what we call a vSphere metro storage cluster or an extended Oracle RAC, right? So Oracle RAC and VMware, they complement each other very beautifully. And I don't know, Ben, if I've answered your question. Thank you. All right. Second, Dave. Okay, let me look at David's question here. Oracle rack cluster on vSAN. How do you recommend configuring shared VMDKs for ASM when replication cannot replicate them to a second data center? So here's the thing, right? When you talk about running Oracle rack, right, on either a VMware platform, that VMware platform could be VMFS, it could be vSAN. The construct of the shared device, right, using the multi-rate flag, that is here to stay, right? Because using that, you're essentially telling your ESXi server hands off, right? The data consistency and the concurrency will be handled by the guest clustering software, Oracle Clusterware in this case, right? So that is something that is here to stay, right? And when you have to configure shared VMDKs for ASM, right? Essentially, when you're talking about replication, I assume you're talking about vSphere replication here, right? So it's there in the roadmap. So I've spoken to the storage and availability unit, right? There are tickets that we have opened. So essentially, we have engineering looking at the prospect of fixing, a prospect of looking at how we could use SRM and vSphere replication with shared VMDKs using multi-rate of flag. I understand today currently that's a limitation here. You cannot use vSphere replication with shared VMDKs, but it's there in the roadmap, right? When it'll get fixed, I have no idea, right? But it is there in the roadmap, and definitely in the future, right? We will have a solution to that as well. But that was a good question as well. So I don't know, David, did I answer your question? I hope I have. Yep, thank you. So yeah, guys, you know what? Look at this one-stop shop, right? I mean, it's not just a collection of documents up here, right? I've even put technical blogs. I've even put KB articles that that's very essential. I mean, this all started as a little project that I did on my own, wherein I had to get access to, or I needed access to all these articles, right? And then I had to go scour the internet. So I decided, why don't I just put it in one particular blog, so it'll help me, right? When this kind of grew into this whole one-stop shop. So have a look at it, right? At some point of time. Yes, absolutely, right? Absolutely. So I will definitely make sure that I bundle this presentation. It will be there on the session catalog. You guys can download that. But apart from that, we don't have any other questions, guys. Have a nice VMworld, right? Stay safe, and hope to see you guys in a physical form next year when this COVID madness gets over. Thank you.